Welcome to the, I'm John Moore and welcome to the ZWAC show. ZWAC stands for Zero Waste Advocacy. We have a Zoomcast once a month, second Tuesday of each month. We start it with cocktail hour, so please join us at 5. And then we talk about something that's new and interesting in zero waste advocacy. So what's always important to me in zero waste advocacy is local advocacy. So tonight we've got 2 people who are going to talk about San Mateo County and their city by city push to regulate single-use disposables, following on, the Berkeley template. And we're going to couple that by kind of something sad, which is one of the, the leading international figures in local zero waste advocacy passed away Sunday. His name is Warren Snow. We featured him on our Recycling Archives segment only in last April. He had terminal cancer and unfortunately has passed, but his work lives on. And so tonight, after our discussion of Redwood City, we're going to talk more about Warren Snow. We're going to have some further readings from his interview in the Recycling Archives that Karen Driver did the interview. She's with us tonight. And we're going to share some of Warren's artwork to go along with it. And Susan Kinsella, who is our Recycling Archives Executive Director, will be making that presentation. So first I want to talk to Alejandra, Warren, and Sally Liu, who are within an umbrella group called Reusable San Mateo Coalition. Alejandra and Sally, first tell us who your affiliations are with, because I know you have others besides that. And then I'll ask you some questions.
Yes, thank you so much for having us tonight. Many hats. My name is Alejandra Warren. I'm the executive director and co-founder of a nonprofit called Plastic Free Future.
Yeah.
The goal is to promote reusable alternatives to single-use plastic. And also we do outreach and connections with systemically excluded communities that they have been not part of the sustainability conversation for a long time. So we want to bring them in to make sure that we get those beautiful ideas from diverse communities. And I am also the co-lead with Sally of the group Reusables San Mateo County. And I do lots of work in sustainability around the Bay Area, including supporting the Office of Sustainability with some education to Latinx businesses in San Mateo County to promote the Foodware ordinance.
Thank you. Sally, who are you with?
So as co-lead of Reusable San Mateo County, I am representing myself as a community member, someone who's passionate about plastic pollution and zero waste. And one of the organizations that I support, I am an ambassador to, and that's Upstream, and they are one of our coalition members. And they are one of the many organizations leading the charge on reusables and reducing waste. And our coalition, Reusable San Mateo County, like Alejandra said, we're a coalition of community members, businesses, organizations that are working to reduce plastic pollution, to safeguard our health, our communities, our environment by championing a reuse culture. And so some of the organizations that we have locally that have officially signed on is Alejandra's organization, Plastic Free Future, Upstream, like I mentioned, Plastic Free Fridays. We have a wonderful youth organization, the Bay Area Youth Climate Action Team. They're high school students that are passionate about climate. Thrive, Clean Water Action, Sea Hugger, Rethink Disposables, Dispatch Goods, Actera, Burlingame Citizen Environmental Council. So we have some that have signed on officially. We have others who are loosely affiliated. And, when Alejandra talks about our work in Redwood City, we just put together a group letter. We were super excited that we had about 18 different groups sign on with us. And we sent a collective letter to the city council, actually just last week. So it's quite a variety of, from citizens to nonprofit organizations.
Well, thank you both for your work and for being here. I hope you asked the Northern California Recycling Association to sign on to that, because one of the things we don't like really is plastic. And in fact,
We would
as a
love
lawyer,
that.
I'll tell you, one of the easiest advocacy things to do is to advocate when there's really nobody on the other side that likes something. And unless you're selling petrochemicals, you can't really like plastic litter. I mean, there's really nothing to say that's positive about it. So, that makes advocacy a little bit easier, I think. So going to Redwood City, I'm going to ask some questions about the upcoming Redwood City ordinance. I'm just going to throw the questions out, and whoever feels most comfortable to ask, feel free to take them. And the first is going to be a multi-part question, which I apologize. I don't like to ask these, but I want to know when the Redwood City ordinance is being heard. Is it being heard virtually or not? If it's being done virtually, how can NICRA members help? And does the Redwood City Council care about people who live outside of Redwood City? Whoever wants to take any of those.
Those are all really great questions. The date right now is October 3rd. I think they're deciding if they're going to have a hybrid version. We will let you know. We would love for your participation, because I think even though you are not exactly in Redwood City, you are really important in this community, and I want to make sure that we bring all voices together. They do care about local opinions, but still, we would love your presence. So we can follow up with you with a specific answer on the hybrid version or virtual or whatever you can do to talk. It would be greatly appreciated. And
Yep.
following up a little bit with what you mentioned about the Berkeley template, I think the reason, because all of these reusable coalitions are popping around the country, because we're not the only one. We have Reusable LA, Reusable San Francisco, which we're also part of, Reusable New England. The reason why they're popping up everywhere is because they're all different. So it sounds like it's the Berkeley model, but it's actually not, because every single community, and I'm sure you know this already, working with different ordinances from San Francisco to Santa Clara, all over the Bay Area, they are so different because every community is different. And that's why it's so important that we support these individual groups. In the case of San Mateo County, which is such a diverse, weird county to deal with, because we have from East Palo Alto to Pacifica, Half Moon Bay. So yeah, they're all different in their own ways.
Well, please do circulate the information so we can get some NICRA people there. When the Berkeley City Council heard its ordinance, it went 2 nights. We had to spend 2 long evenings there, but I counted 25 NICRA members there to speak. They weren't all from Berkeley, but they all cared about it. And so I'm sure we can get some folks to join a virtual meeting. I don't know if I can get anybody to drive to Redwood City or not. So to follow up what you were saying about different places with different ordinances, what are the key features of the Redwood City ordinance? And is it similar to the model ordinance that the county drafted, or is it different?
Sally, do you want to take this one?
Sure. So basically we have not yet seen the draft ordinance, right? It is coming out. I mean, the hearing is on October 3rd. So initially, the way it's working in most of the other cities is that they are adopting the San Mateo County disposable foodware ordinance.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we as Reusable San Mateo County are doing is advocating for the inclusion of the dine-in reusables amendment. And so starting with the San Mateo County ordinance, the number one goal for the county's ordinance is the conversion from plastics to compostables. And they are being careful in that they're, requiring it to be, like certified, paper, sugarcane, wood, bamboo, really trying to limit, the PFAS chemicals and things like that. They had an additional part of the ordinance, which included accessories only upon request. But given that California has passed the law, that's, already been addressed.
Mm-hmm.
And so, our goal, as I said before, is to add on the dine-in reusables portion. And what we have done is performed an assessment, a cost and waste assessment of this amendment to show that this policy can save restaurants a ton of money. And also, in terms of waste, eliminate a huge number of items from our landfills, from compost facilities, but really just, an enormous amount of disposable items.
Yes, so Sally created that amazing financial analysis that is really helping us get connected with city council members and mayors around cities, because I think this is a little bit of a different approach. We are not just pushing for environmentalism that is plastic or die, but we're thinking, okay, who are the people that are actually affected by these changes? And we found out that there were definitely restaurants that are having to pay 3 and 4 more times for the upgrades of plastic, styrofoam to a more sustainable, compostable, especially we're talking about BPI certified, they're really expensive. So we're thinking, how can we support the restaurants and reduce plastics at the same time? And this is definitely a win-win for everyone.
Well, I did see the economic analysis. It was in one of the websites, and that looked pretty compelling. I know that in the Berkeley ordinance, they did a lot of outreach to the local restaurants because it inescapably has impact on them. So it sounds like the Redwood City version that you're looking for, although it's not in final form, is a slight deviation from the county model in the sense that it also targets dine-in disposables. Am I right so far?
That is correct. And I'm going to add a link where you can see from the Office of Sustainability, they update the amendments that each city has. So right now, Half Moon Bay has an amendment for suggested reusables for on-site dining. Daly City has the same language, but Pacifica, which was our biggest win so far, they passed an amendment for mandatory reuse, which means starting June next year, every single restaurant is going to be required to have reuse for on-site dining. So that's our biggest win so far. And that's what we're expecting from Redwood City. We would be okay with suggested, but we know that mandatory makes a really big difference because it gives us the opportunity to support those businesses that don't think that is true because it sounds too good to be true. But when it's mandatory, we can add that additional support for businesses to save that money that they would be technically wasting serving food for dining in compostables.
Well, one of the more compelling speakers at the Berkeley hearing was a broker of single-use disposables who sold stuff to the restaurants. And he was there to support the ordinance because he thought it was a good thing, even though it was kind of against his economic interest. So what pushback are you getting so far on this inclusion of the dine-in aspect?
Well, I would say the county is a little bit nervous thinking about how difficult it's going to be to provide outreach to the cities, because part of the deal is if the city adopts the ordinance, the county is going to provide the outreach. And that's the reason why so many cities are adopting the ordinance. But when you think about creating completely different language, content, and marketing, it was a little bit challenging for them. But now that we have Pacifica as an example, and they've been having to deal with Pacifica and that specific amendment, I feel like we're closer to be aligned with the county. And that's our goal, that at some point the county is going to go in full support of this amendment instead of seeing it as extra work for them, but just a benefit for all restaurants.
Right, because the business community likes uniformity. They don't like to have different rules in different places.
Right. And they are concerned because, they do feel that they have suffered a lot under COVID. I think we all know that. Mm-hmm. And so, that they're concerned about having another ordinance laid down on top of them. And, as Alejandra mentioned, these compostables can be quite expensive. So there is a certain hardship that the county's ordinance would place on these restaurants. And so we feel we have a very strong standing to say this can really help you, help the restaurants in reducing costs and really offset some of the burden that this ordinance would place. Because we've had some conversations with the Chamber of Commerce and the business district, mm-hmm. and it wasn't, there's more resistance. The language that we heard in our meeting was, we do see the benefit. They definitely understand the reduction in waste is important and things like that. But it was, we're suffering under COVID. So there's kind of this push and pull going on right now that, we want to overcome. People, yes. 2022, more people are going out, restaurants are recovering. Alejandra has met with some of these restaurants.
Yeah,
Maybe
as
you
part
could
of the
speak
work
to
we
that.
do a lot of outreach with restaurants because we want to hear from them. Usually we go to restaurants that are already doing reuse and ask them, why are you using reusables for dining? And the amount of answers we find are exactly what we use to come back to city council and say, look, restaurants are telling us that they're saving money, that looks prettier, that is cleaner, that's better than they spend less money in waste and trash. It's less complicated for them because if you think about it, when you change the ordinance every 5 or every 10 years, bioplastics, compostable plastics, PFAS free, BPI certified. Restaurants have no capacity to deal with this complicated language.
Yeah.
When you tell businesses, just use a real plate and a real fork, they're like, that's it, I'm in compliance, I'm in. So we're also making life easier for them.
Yeah, that was my next question is how are you going to make it easier for them to get into compliance? Because that's a lot of stuff to add on to a small business owner, if they are small business owners.
Yes, so the good thing is that since the beginning of developing the language, the county included grants for businesses that want to switch to reuse. So right now the consultants in the county are Rethink Disposables, they're 100% pro reuse, and us, we're 100% pro reuse. So we are offering grants to restaurants that are struggling to do the purchase and actually even purchasing materials for them. So there's a lot of support from the county for reusables, to buy reusable materials for restaurants that are struggling. So there's financial support for sure.
And
What's the political? Go ahead. I'm sorry, Sally. Oh.
I was going to add, Rethink Disposable and Alejandra's organization, Plastic Free Future, the organizations or the restaurants that have made the conversion, on average, it costs them about $300 to buy, real plateware and silverware. And you might think, well, how can it be that little? But if you think about a restaurant, right, they don't have a lot of space. They're not going to buy 1,000 plates, right? They're going to buy 50 plates. And then, as the customers return them, they wash them and then there's new plates. So it's not necessarily an enormous outlay. And there's considerations on things like dishwashers, or can you wash them in the sink? And so having technical assistance from Alejandra's organization or Rethink Disposables kind of walks through the process so they understand what the implications are.
Are the businesses that are getting involved in reusables to do the washing and the delivery of them, are they getting behind this and looking at a business opportunity?
They really are. We found out that after technical assistance is provided, the perspective changes completely because sometimes, again, it's too good to be true. But looking at the numbers, there's savings in water, in energy. And right now, when talking about the climate crisis, it's so important that we push for this because this is a solution that has real climate impact. We're not talking about switching one material for another material, but using something that actually has less emissions, less carbon footprint, less water use, and less energy. And that's exactly the kind of solution that we need while being supportive to communities that are struggling through COVID and inflation and everything that's going on right now.
So when I look on the website, it looks like Redwood City has a 7-person council with 1 seat being vacant right now. So what's the political climate look like for this?
So last year we had met with, let's see, how many did we meet with, Alejandra? We had met with the Vice Mayor Hale, who is now the mayor, and she was very much supportive of this for the reasons Alejandra just mentioned. She is a strong climate advocate, and then she was leading up the council's climate committee. And Alejandra and Eva, another one of our members, had attended that meeting where they had supported the dine-in reusables amendment as part of that meeting. Alejandra, I don't know if you want to elaborate on that.
Yes, it looked absolutely supportive. So we're really excited about this. The only pushback is from the restaurant association, but again, because it feels like one more thing that they have to deal with. But we're hoping that all of the information that we're providing, the financial report, and all of the conversations we'll be having with each one of them to explain, look, this is really a good opportunity to help businesses. We're hoping that we're going to have a really positive result in Redwood City.
Yeah. So just to get back to the council members, there were 3 on the Climate Action Committee, and they unanimously supported it. As I mentioned, Mayor Hale, and the other one was Diane. I think it's the Vice Mayor, Eddie, also were supportive. Again, these are in, private conversations.
Right.
Um,
And the ordinance isn't public yet, so anything could happen.
right.
Willie Brown used to say that if you needed 4 votes in a council, you always ought to go in there with 5 because one's going to stab you in the back.
Yeah, and what's so funny is that we, like, passing policy, we're always hoping for the worst, but let's say our last experience with Pacifica, it was 5 out of 5. Which
Yay.
we were in complete shock. We were like, what's going on here? Because we were really nervous about 2 of them. And after the arguments and the conversations and the data is so important, they just went for it. So yeah, you're right. Anything can happen.
Well, that's good that you're getting through them in advance. You can't just wait till the night of the hearing to do it. You gotta lay the.
Oh no, this is like a 1-year process, one at a time, trying to deal with the Brown Act because they don't want to have conversations between one of them. So it's gotta be like follow up with each one of them every time. It's a lot of work, but it will be worth it.
Right. Serial meetings are illegal. All these little things you have to learn.
Right. And some, have not been responsive to our outreach. But we have, I would say there were 5 that were very positive and supportive. The former mayor, Howard, was very receptive, but she was also very passionate about restaurants and their concerns. So it was unclear,
Have you reached out to Martin Bork of the Ecology Center in Berkeley? Because he was the one that really organized the Berkeley thing tremendously. He would have a lot of good lessons to pass on.
So Miriam Gordon from Upstream worked very closely with Martin, and Upstream is part of our Reusable San Mateo County coalition. So she's been able to provide a lot of the learnings to us.
So October 3rd. If there's anything you want us to see, if you could put it in the chat, links to things, feel free. And does anybody here that has questions for either Sally or Alejandra?
I'd just like to ask it, I'd like to see a copy of that letter that was sent to the, I guess to the council, I believe. If I can get a copy of that.
Definitely, we can forward that.
Doug is the co-chair of our Zero Waste Advocacy Committee, and he's the letter writer. So you want him to write a letter, you got to send him something.
Yeah.
Great. If you want to put your email in
I'll do
the
that.
chat, then we can forward that to you.
All right, we'll do. Doug recycle.
We've been sorting a lot of trash with Doug together, so I have his email.
Oh, great.
Sorting through a lot of trash.
And then I just put the individual advocacy letter into the chat. And so, we have the group letter, as I said, with the 18 organizations. And then we ask individuals, and we, like everybody, we preceded a letter, but of course, if you change it out and write your own, then
yeah, and I think
better.
That's one experience that we had with Pacifica. That's why in this one we are very specific that please add the language, please, whatever you're passionate about, turtles, whales, human health, climate change, anything that you're passionate about, because when we use our passion is when we can create real change. So please make sure that you personalize it, because in Pacifica, a lot of people just send it. And then we got city council back saying, we want to hear stories, real stories, specific stories, not this template. So please make sure that you personalize it a little bit.
I was wondering whether some of these things that you're doing apply to events, for one thing. Because a lot of them have food as part of it. And then the other question is, does it apply to takeout?
Yes, those are
Alejandra.
exactly the same steps that we're taking. We're thinking schools, we're thinking events, and we're thinking takeout. So right now we're focused on Redwood City, but we're also working on a small pilot in Burlingame for reusable takeouts. More details coming soon.
And we had a small effort, as Alejandra said, we we just started last year, and one of the ideas was working with students. And as I mentioned, we had this BayCats, the Bay Area Climate Action, Bay Area Youth Climate Action Team, and they were very interested in working in their schools. So there's a wonderful organization, probably many of you know it, Center for Environmental Health. And Ben works on food advocacy. So he was working with students in Woodside High and Mills High School to try and see if they could bring in reusables within their dining services.
Well, on that vein, I'll pass on one other thing. The most effective piece of advocacy I have ever seen at a public meeting in my 40-year career as a lawyer was the elementary school class that came to the Berkeley City Council meeting. And this young girl, probably about 10 years old, held up a mason jar, probably about this size, maybe a little smaller, which was half full. It was glass. And she said, in this container is all the waste of our entire class for an entire year.
Wow.
You know, and there really wasn't much to say after that. And it was just so compelling. I mean,
Absolutely.
they were the stars of the show, I thought.
Yeah. And that's exactly why we have to step up and do what we can do as much as we can do right now, because it is our responsibility to represent them well. I do a lot of outreach and I talk a lot about reducing plastic in communities. And I had this experience where I was talking to a mom about plastics, microplastics, nanoplastics, plastic everywhere, it's in our blood, blah, 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 blah. And this 7-year-old boy was like, Mom, I knew that already. I told you already. We can use the straws. I told you. And it was like I was supporting something that this kid already knew deep in his core. And I felt like we really need to be responsible enough to represent our generations right and do the best for the next generations.
So Sally and Alejandra, I wanted to make sure that you understood that one of the people on this call, Karen Driver, is here from New Zealand. She's in New Zealand right now. And I was wondering if Karen might have, she's connected with people all over New Zealand, which has New Zealand's one of the first countries, if not the first, I believe it is the first, to go for zero waste as a goal, as a country. I think there's about 9 million people on the 2 islands, something like that. Anyway, Karen, I wonder if you have anything to say to these folks about what you're doing in New Zealand along these lines.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Yeah, I think yeah, we might have been one of the first countries to have that zero waste goal, but then politics got in the way, and we don't have it as a country anymore, which was really sad. So we've slipped back a lot, despite a lot of us working hard to stop that slip, and we're starting to get traction now. In terms of reusables, I'm part of an organisation that's been formed in the last 6 months or so called Reusable Aotearoa. Aotearoa is the New Zealand name, the Maori name for New Zealand, and so what we're doing, because there is reuse happening in New Zealand, but it's fairly piecemeal. And in terms of corporates using it, businesses using it, it usually means that they have to set up their own infrastructure for bottle washing or stuff like that. Restaurants and that tend to have used plates and stuff in their restaurants. It's very rare that you go to a restaurant where they're using single use, and well, I wouldn't go there anyway, so I'm not sure how many, but all the ones that I go, most of it is yeah, it's not really a done thing, single use, unless it's takeaway. So yeah, so there is some really good stuff. There's a really good organisation that's been going for quite a while, and they've just brought I'll stick a link in the chat. It's called Again, and what they're doing is,
I love that.
Yeah, they're rolling out now a new system for that cafes can use, and cafes and restaurants can use for takeaway containers. So they're stainless steel. In fact, what they've just brought out, and I'm not quite sure how it works, I haven't researched it enough, is that a restaurant can buy their own containers and get paid back for those containers, so they don't have to have a universal container. And then they pay again. It's basically would pay again and again to sort of like own those containers and for each use of them, and the use of each one is still cheaper than them buying the organization buying a single use pizza box or carton for takeaway and stuff like that. So I'll put a link in, because it's quite revolutionary here. And yeah, one of the first reports we've done here is through Reuse Aotearoa, is just for local council, just to let them know what's happening in their region and what's happening nationally. So a lot of pushback from businesses here is that when they a lot of our markets are export, because obviously New Zealand's a small country, and they're just told you can't use reusables for, I mean, obviously you couldn't bring reusables back here, but it would be really powerful. What we'd like is to link in with what you guys are doing, and at some stage, and explain to our exporters that or work out how could it work internationally. We've all got a big enough challenge at the moment to get it working domestically, but at some stage that would be really cool. So I'll put that link into again anyway. But I love your work. Thank you for. I've got the links.
You just also passed in New Zealand a new deposit law, correct? Where the deposit is much higher than here.
It hasn't actually. It's not been formally accepted yet. So the law's not passed yet. It's in place, and a lot of the work behind that was done by Warren, who we'll hear about later. And yeah, so that's something we're really looking forward to. So that will be for beverage containers only, but it's a massive start. Yeah.
I wanted to ask a strategy question, Sally and Alejandra. It looks like the idea, and correct me if I'm wrong, was to get the county to pass a model ordinance, and from there to convince the individual incorporated cities within the county to begin following on. And so you've got a number of jurisdictions who have followed on. And I would expect there's going to be a certain amount of pressure brought to bear on Redwood City to follow on because others have done. Was that an intentional strategy on your part to start with a model ordinance?
No, not really. It was not intentional. I think it happened because of the timing. By the time we started Reusable San Mateo County, the Foodware ordinance was already out there. So we just saw it as an opportunity to have an amendment. But by the time we started, a lot of cities had passed the ordinance already, which means we missed the opportunity with many cities. So our goal at this point is to go through all of the cities that haven't adopted the ordinance yet. And after that, reevaluate, because I'm pretty sure that San Francisco is going to be passing reuse ordinance probably in fall or next year. Marin just did. So it's like the trend in the Bay Area, and we want to make sure that San Mateo County is ready in pioneering basically the mandatory reuse ordinance in the Bay Area too.
Is it going to migrate south to Santa Clara County?
Crossing fingers, yes. Alameda, everyone, it just makes sense. And years ago, when I was living in New Hampshire, I was doing some work with schools, and I was going through all of this that sounded so complicated to them. And at the end, they would say, but this is how we used to do it 20 years ago. They came to the conclusion by themselves without me telling them. It was like, wait, so you mean buying real plates, buying real utensils, giving the kids the food in clean materials without any plastic, washing them again and using them again? we already did it. That's nothing new. So that's basically what we're trying to tell people. Yeah, it sounds weird and risky, but it's just going back to the way we used to do things before, with a little bit of extra futuristic technology, if possible, to reduce water and energy use, but basically the same.
What standards are you using for whether something's compostable or not?
For the county?
Yes.
Yeah, it depends on, again, what hauling services they have. We have like 6 different ones in San Mateo County. We have Recology, we have Republic. So it really depends on that. And that's why they're working along with SB 1383 to make sure that everyone has their compost, because it doesn't make sense to be talking about compost without a compost bin in all restaurants. So yeah, it's complicated, but I feel like we're getting there little by little.
And then there's the little problem of getting everything in the right bin,
which doesn't happen with reusables.
Well, thank you again for both joining us tonight. If there's any questions for Alejandra and Sally, and if not, we'll move on to the next segment. And you're welcome to stay. You're welcome to.
Thank you so much for the invitation. And we are doing a lot of work with reusables in communities, educating our communities, promoting bring your own, because we already have the laws to make it happen. We're saving restaurants money when we bring this one for a boba tea. We're saving businesses 25 cents, maybe 50 cents. So we can support businesses, support communities that are exposed to toxic plastics, reduce waste. We can do it all. So thank you so much for inviting us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
John, can I just say thank you very much. As a post-discard reuser, I want to thank you for putting yourselves in the right place.
One plastic bottle at a time. So if you're hoping to see Angie Krohn talk about the Upcycled Food Association, you'll have to wait till next month. She is in what the sports teams call the health and safety protocols. So we wish her the best. Hope she feels better. We'll see her next month to talk about upcycling food and their certification program for that. Now, since we've been talking about advocacy, we want to go back and share a memoriam for one of the true champions of zero waste advocacy and an international leader, and who sadly just passed away. So Susan Kinsella, who is the executive director of the archives, is going to read some further excerpts from Warren Snow's interview and intersperse it with some of his artwork. And Susan, if I can turn it over to you, and maybe you could remind our viewers a little what the Recycling Archives is all about.
Sure, thanks. The Recycling Archives is looking at, we didn't really have our history saved throughout all of the decades of building up the recycling programs that we have now. And a lot of the people that started them had wonderful visions, great plans. They were full of energy, and they were not looking at a program that would end up putting everything into a landfill or creating lots of waste. They were looking at something that would turn all of the materials back into being reused or recycled. So we wanted to talk to these people and get their histories, get their stories, be able to save them, because we think there's a lot to learn from that not only looks at the past, but also informs us about great ideas and paths that we should be working on towards the future as well. And tonight we're going to be talking about Warren Snow, and Bonnie Betts is going to be helping, because I have about a dozen or 13 or so slides of his work that we want to show as well. So she's going to run the slideshow for me, which I really appreciate. So we lost a luminary in the recycling world just this past Saturday. Warren Snow lived in New Zealand, or Aotearoa, the Maori name that he preferred to use, but he had a profound effect on recycling in the United States and many other parts of the world as well. Australia, the US, and New Zealand all shared in developing and solidifying the concept of zero waste in recycling. After Jerry Gillespie worked to get the Australian Capital Territory to promote no waste by 2010, and Dan Knapp brought that news back to the US where it became zero waste, Warren Snow was influential in getting the first national government, New Zealand, to adopt it as a national goal. We at the Recycling Archives have been communicating with Warren frequently over the past year and a half after his colleague Karen Driver interviewed him using the 22 questions format that many of the archives interviews loosely follow. And after that, it was transcribed, and then Dan began a back and forth email conversation with Warren that resulted in a cohesive narrative version of his interview. Along the way, we learned more about Warren's life, including that he was a very gifted artist and illustrator. So tonight, we want to show you some of Warren's drawings and explain the part they played in his work advancing recycling in New Zealand. And keep in mind that almost all of these photos and drawings were done well before the internet. Most of the graphics were drawn by hand because we didn't have digital processing yet, but they still show Warren's wonderful skill. So at 19, Warren started a successful sign company on New Zealand's North Island. And since this was before the internet, signs had to be personally designed and hand painted and screen printed. As Warren explained, I got worried about all the printing inks being washed down the drain. And then there were the offcuts from all the plastic and the polystyrene and all the other materials we used. I mean, what to do with them? We sent a little truckload of that stuff to the dump every week. And it really got me thinking that we were wasting these materials. And I was young and still idealistic enough to think about things like this. The waste involved in my business was phenomenal. Plus, I didn't agree anymore with doing marketing for companies whose products and operations were taking society down the wrong path. One day, a representative from a cigarette company came to pick up another order, and I told him we wouldn't be doing work for his company anymore because I didn't agree with their product or the way they were advertising to young people through sport. I wanted to drop other clients too, but then I realized if I kept doing that, the company would go broke and the staff would be out of a job. So I sold the company to two of my colleagues for a bargain price within 2 weeks of making that decision. I was about 24 years old when I sold the business. And I think we have to go back one, Bonnie. No, go the other way. Yeah, thanks. I decided living closer to nature was the only way I could really help to save this world. So I fitted an old bus into a mobile home and went traveling with my first wife and 2 children looking for land, which we found in New Zealand's far north. Well, in there, Warren built his own house, primarily from materials that were reused or repurposed, and developed a back to the land community. Warren describes those years as, "It was an amazing experience, the learnings of which have informed the rest of my life to date. It was an absolute paradise for my daughters and the children of other families that settled with us on the land. But after a few years, I started to think that whilst living on the land was a valid response for many, I felt a need to get back into society. My wife and I had recently separated, so I left the land and moved into a little township near the district's commercial hub, Kaitaia. And there Warren opened another sign shop, but a government upheaval in the 1980s created economic chaos in local communities. His skill as an artist and illustrator again became key for advancing his goals. As he explains, the Roger Douglas reforms in the 1980s switched New Zealand from being the world's most command and control economy to possibly being the least regulated. Overnight, a group of 4 or 5 people, hard right-wingers, got control of the left-wing Labour Party and privatized all the state-owned enterprises like railway, telecoms, forestry, and so on. Selling off those assets resulted in massive unemployment almost overnight because the new, mainly US owners made thousands of employees redundant. Short term, it ruined local economies around New Zealand. I saw the effects in Kaitaia. I saw young people signing up for training programs because they had no place else to go, no jobs. And so I started talking to people saying, why don't we set up a business that the community owns? I'd never had this idea before. And it went right over the heads of the people I was talking to. They didn't get it, but I kept thinking, why couldn't we do that? I mean, I didn't even get it, but I just felt, why couldn't we give it a try? So Warren and Cliff, his business partner, decided to start a community-owned business that would create jobs for local people. And again, Warren describes it as, we started by inviting supportive community members to be our board of directors and set up a not-for-profit company called the Community Business and Environment Center, or CBEC, as it soon became known. But what to do? We needed to raise some money. It needed to be something that was more systemic, something new that the whole community could get behind. It had to create new jobs, have an environmental aspect, and give us regular income. Also, by now, I was extremely interested in the concept of recycling. We managed to get New Zealand $2,000 in funding from the Department of Social Welfare, our first grant. And that helped us to build a secure office in the sign shop and buy some office equipment. Okay, so now we go to the next one. Thanks. And then we learned that the Far North District Council was about to close the local town dump and turn it into a transfer station with no recycling at all. The rubbish would be freighted to a landfill 14 kilometers away near the ocean at 90 Mile Beach. We seized this opportunity to put together a proposal for CBEC to operate the site to take advantage of changes that were coming in the way that discards were handled. We got our proposal onto the agenda for a full council meeting. Our proposal showed we could operate that place as a full recycling center for only about 10 to 20,000 New Zealand dollars more than if the site was operated only as a wasting transfer station. And for that financing, we would create a network of recycling centers around the district, feeding materials into a processing and sales hub in Kaitaia. We'd set up a curbside collection scheme. We'd do composting. We were going to do everything, waste oil collection, you name it. Going on to the next illustration now. Is it showing up, Bonnie? We calculated what the landfill savings would be if we diverted specific quantities of the discard stream. We demonstrated that they would be saving much more than we were asking them for. Our numbers suggested there was a good chance that the CBEC business model could be making a profit from the district council's investment, as well as savings for them. But the engineers were totally against it, saying it's impossible to recycling anything more than 20% of the waste stream. They spoke out strongly against giving the contract to us, but some of their notes were leaked to us the night before. We found everything we needed to counter their arguments in those leaked documents. We can go to the next one now. Yeah, go to the next one. Thanks. We quickly did an economic analysis of what they were saying compared to our message and presented our refutation in a nicely laid out A3 spreadsheet. The councilors who would make the decision were clearly confused at first, but the mayor gave a rousing speech that turned everybody around and we won the contract. Unfortunately, we made enemies of the engineering department, which hounded us for years because they got to manage the contract from the council side. Another perfect opportunity arose around the same time. The Youth Learning Center in Kaitaia was about to be closed. However, management funding for 3 years had already been allocated. So we successfully proposed to the education department that they give that money to us to support the development of a community-owned business. And with that, we had an amazing start with decent management funding for 3 years and the contract for the recycling center. And it all cascaded from there. We set up other businesses under CBEC, and within a year or so, we had at least 70 people employed, and we were recycling the profits back into the local economy. Based on the success of our business, I was asked by the Ministry for the Environment to write a document on how to set up a community recycling program. This report would be published as an addendum to the new landfill guidelines the government was putting out at the time. I wrote and illustrated the report, which was called Recycling, a Case Study, and I included anything I could, from explanations on how to design a recycling center to calculating composting ratios, setting up and running communications, deciding on commodity prices, and many other technical matters. My contribution to the landfill guidelines was in great demand, so the ministry printed it as a standalone document, and it was their most popular publication at the time. It also was the first report I'd ever written, to be honest. Next slide. We began to feel supported much more by the community. As we got on with the building of the recycling center, it became clear that the community stood behind us. I was a friend of Ted Shadbolt, a well-known anti-Vietnam War activist. We asked him to come up to Kaitaia and help us with the opening of the new recycling center. We scripted the opening so that the mayor would give a speech. Then he would officially close the dump and then cut the ribbon to open the new recycling center. We brought a pile of dirt down to the edge of the landfill that was being closed and placed it where the audience could see it. And then here comes Tim Shadbolt racing along in his big old Holden, which a Holden is a New Zealand built version of a US General Motors car, but with right-hand drive. So he roars in, and there's quite a big crowd, maybe about 100 people at least, all excited about the mayor closing the dump and opening the brand new recycling center. Tim roars in with his beat up old Holden, gets a screwdriver out, ignores the mayor, and opens up the boot. And then he starts throwing out all his rubbish onto the last little uncovered dump area near where the dirt is piled up. The mayor runs over to Tim and apprehends him and goes, "You can't do that. We're closing this dump." And Tim says, "I just thought I'd get a few more bags in before it closes." So the mayor says, "Okay, you can put them there, but you're going to have to get on that bulldozer over there and spread that last bit of dirt over the dump." Everybody loved it. Tim had been almost a folk legend status in the far north, and everybody knew of him. Next slide. So here is Warren's schematic for how a production system should work ideally. He traces it all the way from the beginning, when natural resources are mined or extracted or logged or any other way that they're turned into raw materials, and then they're manufactured into products that go into a commodity. And this illustration is from 1992. So he named it according to the conventions of the time, calling it diverting the waste stream. But within a few years, he met Dan Knapp, and their conversations began shifting his thinking to recognizing that the materials that were eventually discarded are not waste. They are resources that need to be returned to reuse and recycling. And those discussions led both Warren and Dan to further develop the concepts and understandings that have led to our current recognition of zero waste. Next slide. I mean, after all, do we really want to be throwing our earth away? As Warren explains it, here we are in a social media, high-tech communication era. Everything's so high-tech, and yet we still use a midden technology for disposing of waste. What he means is MIDDEN. Like in medieval times, we take it to the edge of the city and you just dump it in a big hole. You know, we actually have ancient middens right now in the midst of many of our communities. I mean, personally, I'm talking about, I used to live just down the street from one when I lived in Marin County. And if you know the history or how to read the land, you can recognize raised areas that are actually covering up Native American middens, where tribes threw their trash and kitchen scraps when there were no more options to reuse them. So even now, archaeologists find these to be valuable sources of information about how the local Native American tribes lived hundreds of years ago. Next slide. Thanks, that's it. So Warren continues with, we did a calculation once of what permitted airspace was worth. And okay, so for those of you who might not be deep into the lingo of the recycling field, permitted airspace is the eventual total volume that's permitted to be placed in a landfill. But until it's reaching its limits, most of that landfill's volume is empty airspace that's slowly filling up with garbage. And Warren explains the opportunity cost of that landfill is literally millions and millions of dollars, because it's a 100 or 200 acre site. It's surrounded by houses now, but you can't build houses on it because of how it was used. You see, when people throw things in a landfill, if all the costs were internalized, including the opportunity costs, you wouldn't be able to afford to put anything into the landfill. A landfill is not a sustainable or affordable technology. It's a habit that we've never gotten out of. And unfortunately, understanding that opportunity cost is the only way that we're going to change. So here's a different kind of opportunity cost. Warren says, I gave a keynote at a conference on how a town could save their community from a massive mall project on the edge of town. I talked about the way the materials flow through a community and the way a community is structured around the town center and then the surrounding ecosystem around retail. And I said, it's all very much connected. It's all a social thing. And that a huge mall would disturb that ecosystem by destroying the small local businesses and sending the profits out of the town. It's all unsustainable. Next slide. Yeah. So I read this next graphic of Warren's as talking about how it all comes down to, how are you going to dispose of materials that are discarded or left over? Are you going to waste them by burning or burying them? Or are you going to support recycling by funding it with its share of the cost of disposing the materials into reuse, recycling, and composting opportunities? As Warren shows in this graphic, recycling works by ultimately costing less than landfilling, especially when you account for all the costs. It also imitates nature by keeping as much within the system as possible, returning as materials used over and over to the greatest extent possible, rather than being so casually and disrespectfully thrown out of the system and called waste that is actually wasted. Next slide. Even now, New Zealand is making major improvements to its recycling system. As recently as March of this year, the New Zealand Minister for the Environment announced that the government would be establishing a bottle deposit refund scheme. And Warren said, while this archives interview was progressing, the government announced it is going to proceed with a bottle deposit scheme, to my joy, as I have been working on this for over 20 years. I received an invitation to attend the opening and was recognized by Minister David Parker for my work over more than 2 decades campaigning for such a scheme, which will, among other advantages, create at least 2,000 new jobs in New Zealand. It should have happened many years ago, and it would have, except for intense lobbying against such a scheme over that whole time by beverage and packaging interests. Karen Driver, who did the original interview with Warren, asks him in that interview, do you think there's a spiritual dimension to recycling? And Warren answers, the spiritual dimension is revealed to me when someone who has been causing a bit of trouble on the streets of Kaitaia gets a supervisor role at the recycling center. So this former troublemaker who got a job at the Kaitaia recycling center turns up one day at the CBEC office in a car he just bought, which is better than my car as the manager of CBEC. And then later he walked in again and said, I bought a house for myself and my family. That to me is a spiritual dimension. That would be the biggest thing keeping me going. When you know you're helping change lives by creating these business structures that get people working on improving the community. If someone who was previously ignored finds meaningful work in a business that you helped create out of rubbish, a new position that hasn't taken another job away, well, that's something big that's been added. And in this case, the person I'm talking about actually went with his family to Australia where he got an even bigger job. I also remember a young woman who successfully applied for a job at the Kaitaia recycle station. Her whole family would drive her to work every day because no one else in her family had a job. In fact, hardly anyone on her street had a job because of the Roger Douglas reforms that I referred to earlier. One day, Cliff, my CBEC partner, decided to offer her a supervisor role with more responsibility. she said she couldn't take the role. It was a matter of confidence. Cliff asked her to think about it and left it at that. He went back to the site a few days later, and here was Doreen carrying a little briefcase satchel she'd picked up from out of the recycling stream. And she said, "Yep, Cliff, I'm ready." You know, she thought about it and decided she was going to take that job as a supervisor. And now she had her briefcase. Whoa, if that isn't a spiritual dimension to that, what is spiritual? That kind of story keeps me going, even now. So as you can see, Warren Snow influenced changes benefiting recycling and community development all over the world, and we will miss him dearly.
Thank you, Susan. That was beautiful. So if you're interested in more about Warren, I put in the chat a link to the April show that we had, which features more readings from his interview, as well as Warren himself answering questions. And you can see just a little bit of his warmth and generosity of spirit that makes him so missed as we sit here tonight. And I apologize, I hit the enter button a few too many times on the chat. So Karen, if you're still there, being the only New Zealander on the Zoom left, if I can put you on the spot and ask you a question. I'm listening to the part about the Kataya transfer station, and I've got a fair amount of experience with local land use politics. So I see that kind of achievement of going into a competitive bid situation against, a well-financed group opposing and getting a contract to build an infrastructure of recycling facilities. How was Warren able to do that? What were the secrets of his leadership and advocacy that got that done? Because I find that an astonishingly difficult task.
I don't know personally because I wasn't in New Zealand in those days, but knowing Warren just through tenacity, and they would have done it on with very little money, whereas the companies they were competing against would have thrown money at it. I suppose it's honesty, integrity, and just sheer perseverance, and possibly working the audience, so making sure that they had the right influence from within the community to support their what they were proposing, and I think probably selling it as well. Why wouldn't you choose this option? Because there's all these benefits.
And I gather he had a certain authenticity of walking the walk too.
Yeah. I mean, he was such a genuine. No, he was a genuine guy. He lived in the community. He was part of the community. He had respect within the community, and it was massive. So yeah. I mean, even now, through the Zero Waste Network, we've been the whole tender process and getting contracts is still so swayed towards those those big businesses that have got the money to throw fancy resources and lawyers and all that sort of stuff into it.
Yeah.
But no, he did an amazing job.
I think one of the things that helped him a lot was having that sign company too. And getting into business himself in a way that helped a lot of people who were in business. He was an essential business in the same sense that we learned urban ore is an essential business when COVID hit, because we supply other businesses that are essential with materials. And what he was doing was supplying other businesses with graphical ideas that helped them promote their businesses. And even though he got out of it because he didn't like the products that he was having to throw into the landfill, the offcuts and all that sort of thing, and also because he had he had a calling,
Mm.
and his calling was zero waste. He really wanted to do it all.
No, he did. And it's been lovely to see his artworks, because I've not seen them before this process. So yeah, it's good to get those out.
You can see what a talented
Oh,
person he was, and he had very humble beginnings in that little town way up north. He somehow or other managed to have an influence all over the island and all over the world, really.
Yeah.
He's an amazing man.
yeah, definitely. We lost a real treasure.
I don't think he ever lost his humble nature either. He never put on airs. He never, he was always fun to be with. You know, we traveled around together in little cars. He was always driving really fast on the wrong side of the road for me. So I wondered whether he was going to get out of this alive, but he drove really well, and we managed to survive all of that.
Luckily, in those days, there wouldn't have been too much traffic.
There wasn't, yeah, that was one of the good things about it, all right.
Just as well, he wouldn't have been here otherwise.
Yeah, you get over to Australia, you see all those trucks that are armored with all the bull bars on the front and everything for hitting kangaroos.
Mm. Yeah.
Run around, and you have these gigantic truck trains that you meet on the roads, on the rural roads, that are three semi trailers long, and they come roaring along with all the bull bars on the front and everything. They're very, I mean, you know, that movie, what's the movie with that's all about Australia and how you know, it's kind of a dystopian story.
Mad Max.
Mad
Yeah.
Max, yeah. It's Mad Max out there on the roads. Boy, I'm telling you, it's really something. But New Zealand wasn't really like that. It was a little more civilized, I guess.
I think so.
Of course. Definitely more civilized than Australia. Talk to any Kiwi.
The Aussies have a funny way of looking at New Zealand. The two of them are they're kind of joined at the hip in a way. And I mean, I had one postcard that showed Australia as real small and New Zealand as real big. That was one of the New Zealand ones. But then I was driving around with a brother of, or an uncle of a guy that my daughter Hillary, Mary Lou, and I have a daughter Hillary in Australia, and she was marrying him. So I'm driving around with this guy, and he says, "Hey Dan, you know, over there in New Zealand, they've got a new thing they're doing with sheep, you know." And I said, "What's that?" And he says, "They've started shearing them."
That's
For all of you
rude.
who don't understand, that's a sex joke.
That was the uncle of the groom's uncle,
Yes, it was.
not the, yeah.
Is Susan Collins still on?
She is. I was going to put her on the spot and ask her a question if she's
Oh,
willing.
good. You do that, please.
So Susan Collins is with the Container Recycling Institute and knows more about the bottle bills than anybody I know. And I think that she would give Warren Snow a fair amount of credit for making that possible. And I wondered if Susan, if you'd be willing to talk about Warren's impact. Or not.
You're on.
No,
Yeah.
I didn't realize I was muted so that my background noises weren't making noise. I first met Warren in 2010 when Container Recycling Institute, CRI, hosted a global deposit summit in Washington, DC. And Warren was one of the people who traveled from very far away. We had people from Germany, Australia, New Zealand, a lot of different countries in Europe, and a lot of different states in the US. And since then, we've had another couple of global deposit summits in Scotland and in London. And so over the years, I've seen Warren at these things. And then of course, we've collaborated from time to time. As he was doing different reports and looking for information, we would go back and forth via email and every once in a while on phone, but obviously the time difference makes that, really hard. And yeah, all day today, I've been recounting just some memories of some lovely conversations of, when we did these global deposit summits, when you bring that many people together, there's always like the meetings, but then you also do the touring, right? You all get in a tour bus and you do some activity, or whether, group activities, group dinners, those kinds of things. And I just have memories that are almost more feelings than actual memories of the actual things we were talking about. Sitting next to him on the tour bus as we were going somewhere, and the different conversations that we had, and his super sweet, super polite. I was explaining who Warren was to my coworker, and said he was just a gem, an absolute gem, just heart of gold. And I've just been remembering that all day long. And also reaching out. So there's this whole other world, there's this zero waste world, and then there's also this global deposit world. And I've been reaching out to people in the global deposit world to let them know what happened. And I so thank you guys for the links that you shared, because I've been sharing those links to the rubbish thing. I'm going to mangle the name, so I won't try. And the obituary, I've been sharing those with people. I posted it on Twitter. I don't know how else we might, post it out there. My board had a conversation and all shared, memories and thoughts when I sent them the email. So I've had a lot of memory sharing with a lot of people today.
Cool.
Thank you for sharing that.
And thank you for having this. Thank you for giving me a place to talk, where we can share memories with each other. Thank you.
Because we can't all go to New Zealand for the service.
Susan, you have a monumental task in front of you, getting the whole world to go for deposits. It must be daunting and it must be hard. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, every once in a while, people ask me why I keep going on. And Warren said some of the same things that were in the interview that was posted today. I keep going on because I know it's a brilliant idea. It's a stinking brilliant concept. It works out so perfectly in concept. I worked in recycling for 20 years before I really discovered the magic of deposits. And I didn't have any other tool in my toolbox where I could put a program into place, and 2 years later, people would be recycling a material type at an 80% rate. There is no other tool in my toolbox to this day that works that well. And that's when I got hooked. And that's when I said, okay, there's a whole bunch of things we have to do, but this one is just such a good tool. We got to do this, and we got to do it everywhere, and we got to do it yesterday. And as much as I'm constantly up against the worst of the worst, industries that have all these lobbyists and consultants who just lie, they just lie like a rug. And they have a lot of times a sort of bullying nature, and I'm constantly careful, about what I say so that I don't get sued, because I know they would sue me out into oblivion if they could. I've been through a lawsuit situation with National Recycling Coalition. It was a real thing. And there was the whole bankruptcy, which was, if you guys remember that, it was NRC got funded by the beverage industry, and then the funding got, the rug got pulled out from under them, and it almost bankrupted the NRC. And we in California, the CRA membership, had the winning votes to put it over the edge to make the bankruptcy not happen, so that NRC would, live for another day. Anyway, with all of that against, all of those forces allied against doing the right thing, I absolutely believe that it is the right thing to do. And I absolutely believe that it's just a matter of time before everybody has that same aha moment that I did. And we all move forward singing Kumbaya, having container deposits everywhere in the world. I know it will happen. I just want to make sure I stay alive long enough to make it happen. And I want to do everything I can to accelerate this process so that maybe I can actually retire someday. And these last 5 years have been the best because starting in 2017, container deposit laws started passing left and right around the world. And New Zealand was one of this, group of like at least 2 dozen that passed within a period of time. And when I noticed the trends start to happen, I started to compile a spreadsheet that had every place there was a deposit law and what the population was there. And from the beginning of time in 1970, when British Columbia passed the first one, to 2017, so 1970 to 2017, that's 47 years. In that period of time, enough deposit laws passed to cover about 295 million people. Then from 2017 to the end of 2021, enough new deposit laws passed to more than double the coverage of people. We're now up to like 735 million people covered, when just in 2017, it was 300 million. So finally, these things are catching it's like wildfire. And I can see to 2030, we're going to be covering 1 billion people. And I can see a future where we have this all throughout the United States. And all of that is all the right signals to give me hope and make me keep doing what I'm doing. And Warren said those same things. He said, if you know it's the right thing, keep doing it. You may not be able to see the results of this, but you're gonna push that progress forward. It's a good thing, whether you see it quickly or whether it takes a long time, or maybe you don't even see it happen. You know that you're going down the right road. I have that faith that I'm going down the right road.
Thank you, Susan. I really, really appreciate your comments there. And I also would like to just ask you one more question, which is, we know that we run into these difficulties as we take market share away from wasting interests. But it's hard to get the recycling advocates to actually acknowledge that this kind of opposition exists. And I think that was one of the things that killed, I was very involved in the NRC, and I think it was one of the things that killed the NRC was that they got too cozy with the likes of Dow Chemical and various others. And a lot of people turned away from them at that point. But I think one of the things that we need to do, and it's in our recycling archives almost every time, there are many, many significant stories of people like you being sued or being intimidated or being even murdered. And we've managed to get beyond that, and but we need to understand it and acknowledge it, don't you think?
Yeah, and I just always have to be very careful about the way I say it. When we publish a report, I do a final read where I go through every single sentence. I read the sentence and I ask myself the question, could I be sued for this? Then I read the next sentence and I ask myself, could I be sued for this? And then I read the next sentence. And I'm careful what I say in the media. I'm careful to document the heck out of everything. Because those are the things that can make us vulnerable. But you're right, it's not just, so the organizations, the businesses that are allied against us or against moving reuse forward, moving recycling forward, moving waste reduction forward, are the ones that are doing so because their entire profit model is based on the opposite of that. And the reason there's such seemingly naivete amongst the recycling community, not realizing a lot of times that they're being lied to. Sometimes they're being, directly lied to their face, or that they're being misled. Or, so much of the conventional wisdom in recycling is just wrong. Even amongst all of our friends, people just don't get it, because it's human nature for us to believe that when somebody tells you something, they're telling the truth. That's what all of our conversations are based on all day long, every day, right? That's how we communicate with each other. We're pre-programmed to talk to each other and to use that information going forward. If you ask me a question, where is X? And I say it's in the refrigerator, you're going to go to the refrigerator and get it. And so when these organizations tell half truths or mislead by what they say, use weasel words to make it sound like it's one thing when it's really 100% the opposite, 90% of the people are not going to catch on to the weasel words. And it's not their fault. It's the fault of the liars, not the fault of the people who believe it.
Wonderful. Thank you.
The most recently published book by Malcolm Gladwell studies that, in fact.
Oh.
And I wish I could remember the title because I'd say it, but his premise is that people in general are bad lie detectors. And he points out a number of concrete examples because he uses a lot of interesting sociology statistics. But his premise is people are bad lie detectors. And the way that they cope with being bad lie detectors is exactly what you're saying, is a predisposition to believe what you hear until you're proven otherwise. So if you're told it's in the refrigerator, you're going to believe it's in the refrigerator until 3 times you go to the refrigerator and it's not there. And then you start thinking, well, maybe I'm not getting told straight about this. And that's just how we are. And I think in what you're talking about, it's also, there's usually a close working relationship between the listener to the lie and the maker of the lie. And most often in that scenario, they're collegial, and the listener is never going to want to believe that the maker is telling misleading. And in fact, the maker of the lie is probably just repeating what somebody higher up the corporate ladder is, sent down the chain. So it's not even coming from the liar, it's coming from the person above the liar. And I just think those are all worthwhile things to remember when we're talking about that.
Mm-hmm.
Most people don't want
that's true. Even some of the people who lie know that they're lying, but some of the people who are lying don't even know it. They've just been trained to say those words. You're absolutely right.
And I'm sorry, I apologize on behalf of the legal profession for what you've gone through. I'm sorry. I wish you would get insurance.
Yeah, we do have good insurance, but we're too small and too vulnerable.
You don't want to use your insurance. No.
Yeah. Another technique that I can use sometimes, though, is to partner with a larger organization that has the wherewithal to do something. So a lot of times you all see my work and you don't know you're seeing it, because the most biting stuff comes out through some other organization. I do the research, I feed it to them, I explain it to them, I help them write it, they publish it, and they're the ones that are known that, and I help them through the, let's make sure this is all correct so you can't be sued, but it's also, they have enough strength that those are the ones that the opposition isn't going to go after.
I'm glad you've got that.
Have you sanded off your fingerprints? Is that?
Yeah, I do a lot of stuff where there's no fingerprints.
I think there's another factor too, and Warren talked about this in his interview, where we know people personally that work with lots of these corporations, and we're friends with them at the conferences and everything. So we tend to believe whatever they say because they're friends, but forget that they're still working for a corporation, and no matter what anybody says, the corporation has a purpose that is like its core business, and they can say whatever they want, but they're always going back to that core business, which is usually not compatible with the environmental goals and the recycling goals that we're pursuing.
Right.
Well, that's where we need to make the shifts. We
And
need
what?
to, that's where we need to make the shifts.
Yeah.
We need to develop more businesses based on recovered materials and make the secondhand economy is so large already. It hasn't been identified as a single market structure, but it is one, and it's huge. We used to have, in the East Bay, we used to have a map. What was that called, Dan? The salvage map of the East Bay,
Yeah,
something
I
like
think
that?
I put out the first one, and then other people took it up.
Mhm. Yeah, Steve Drabinsky did it for a few years, and we did it. And it was a map with all the salvage and secondhand shops labeled on it. And the cities of Berkeley and Albany at one point authorized a book. There was a physical saddle stitched book that was maps of neighborhoods, and the person who made the maps actually walked all those streets, because there are a lot of little secondhand shops and regular structural backyard sales areas that you would never know existed, but they do. And they're relied on by people who are a large market segment. And, like us, if we could do more portraits of the industry and all of its segments, we're vast. It's huge. It would be very useful to calculate the economic impact. We pay, what do we pay, Dan? $25,000 to $30,000 a month in sales taxes, which ain't nothing.
About 28 or 29,000 right now. Yeah, when I put out that first recycling, the first thing that was about the reuse organizations in our area, my thought was that our real competition was not each other. Our real competition was the transfer station and the landfill, and possibly the incinerator, but we beat the incinerators. So we, that was our competition, and we needed to band together. And that's a hard thing to do for people that run these small businesses, because the business you may say, I own this business, but the business also owns you. And you have to be turned on to the business and its needs 7 days a week, 300 and however many days a year that you're open. You are on point. And that's a big commitment. So it's really inherently difficult to organize people like that. But on the other hand, it needs to be done. So maybe some of the young'uns that are coming along will be able to do that. I hope so.
That would be good to do studies like that.
Well, we certainly see a number of young'uns that look to promote these ideas in the future. It's always bittersweet for me to preside over an evening like this, where we have to honor someone who's recently passed, because we want to preserve the good things that they were about. And I was glad that we heard so many good things about Warren tonight, like we heard about when Will Bax passed, and all of his friends showed up to talk about him. So I think we'll adjourn for this evening. Again, this is the ZWAC show, second Tuesday of every month, 5 o'clock cocktails, 5:30 start time on time. We'll do something new and interesting. But for tonight, thank you, everybody, and we'll see you next month.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
John.